Welcome to another episode of the E3 with Larry Ice video series. We are deep in our study in Galatians. This is chapter 2, part 4, and it's entitled Caving In Under Peer Pressure. Let's dive right in, shall we? Earlier in Galatians 2, 8 and 9, we read, "For he who was at work for Peter in his apostleship to the circumcised was at work for me also to the Gentiles. And recognizing the grace that had been given to me, James and Cephas and John, who were reputed to be pillars, gave to me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship so that we might go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised." The mutual respect and unity we saw from the leaders of the church in Jerusalem and the Apostle Paul is reflective of the Spirit who lives in us. He leads us into truth and spiritual unity. What he does not do is force us to conduct ourselves according to the truth that is in us. We all know this because we all know how we are. We all, as James wrote in James 3:2, stumble in many ways. What we are about to read is at once heartbreaking and comforting. Picking up our study now with Galatians 2:11 and 12, we read that Paul said this, "But when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For prior to uh, the coming of some men from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles, but when they came, he began to withdraw and separate himself, fearing those from the circumcision." Now, before we begin talking about the principles being presented in this passage, I want to pause to look at a small clause that can mislead our thinking. In verse 11, we read that Peter stood condemned. It's natural for us to read this and think that Peter was judged and found guilty by Paul, or perhaps even by God. And though that is the natural way to understand this in English, the Greek here does not support that view. Stood condemned is translated from kategnosmenos, N. Kategnosmenos, N. This construct means to find fault with, to blame. It tells us that he had incurred the censure of the Gentile Christians. Luther translated this nicely. He says, as a charge had been laid against him. So Paul spoke against Peter because he had changed his behavior in order not to incur the disapproval of the Jews who had come. I'm sure some of us can identify with this. I sure can. Peer pressure can be very compelling, can't it? Peter could sometimes speak and act out of strong emotion, as evidenced by his rashly cutting off the ear of the high priest's servant when the authorities came to arrest Jesus. And this is in John 18:10. Peter also wanted people to like and accept him. Around the fire, while Jesus was being questioned, Peter denied knowing Jesus so that he wouldn't be rejected by those gathered there. Having agreed that the gospel of the grace of God being preached by Paul was correct, he ate with the Gentile Galatians in Antioch. This was not permitted under Jewish law. Indeed, in Acts 10:28, Peter said, "You yourselves know that it is forbidden for a Jewish man to associate with or visit a foreigner, and yet God has shown me that I am not to call any person unholy or unclean." It's a big statement. This reference is to a vision that he had while he was in a trance. Acts 10:9 through 20 records it this way. Peter went up on the hilltop about the 6th hour to pray. But he became hungry and wanted to eat. But while they were making preparations, he fell into a trance and he saw the sky opened up and an object like a great sheet coming down, lowered by four corners to the ground, and on it were all kinds of four-footed animals and crawling creatures of the earth and birds of the sky. A voice came to him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything unholy and unclean." Again the voice came to him a second time, "What God has cleansed, no longer consider unholy." Wow. Now, while Peter was greatly perplexed in mind as to what the vision which he had seen might mean, behold, the men who had been sent by Cornelius had asked directions to Simon's house. And when they appeared at the gate and calling out, they were asking whether Simon, who was also called Peter, was staying there. While Peter was reflecting on the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are looking for you, but get up, go downstairs and accompany them without misgivings, for I have sent them myself." The vision appeared to be about food, but it was really about the huge change brought about by the new covenant. Jesus broke down the dividing wall between Jew and Gentile. He did that by what he did at the cross, as we're told at Ephesians 2:13 through 18, which says, "But now in Christ Jesus, you who previously were far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who made both groups into one and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall by abolishing in his flesh the hostility, which is the law composed of commandments expressed in ordinances, so that in himself he might make the two one new person, in this way establishing peace, and that he might reconcile them both in one body to God through the cross, by it having put to death the hostility. And he came to and preached peace to you who were far away, and peace to you who were near. For through him we both have our access in one Spirit to the Father." Even knowing all this, Peter modified his conduct when some Jewish believers from James's group came to town. That was bad, of course. But even worse, we find in Galatians 2:13 that the rest of the Jews joined him in hypocrisy, with the result that even Barnabas was carried away by their hypocrisy. This is the opposite of the sort of behavioral change we're exhorted to exhibit in places like Romans 14, where we curtail our freedom if it will prove to be a stumbling block to those around us. It's the opposite of the kind of change Paul himself advocates in 1 Corinthians 9:20 and 21, where he wrote that, "To the Jews I became as a Jew, so that I might gain Jews. To those who are under the law, I became as one under the law, though not being under the law myself, so that I might gain those who are under the law. To those uh, who are without the law, I became as one without the law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so that I might gain those who are without the law." We're well advised to meet people where they are. Paul set a great example of that throughout his ministry. At the same time, it's not profitable to be hypocritical or two-faced. This breeds confusion, and it sends mixed messages that can damage the faith of others, the very thing that we are warned in Romans 14 and other places, including here. Remember that Peter was a leader who was held in high regard. His equivocation in this case was doubly harmful. Not only did it cause the Gentile believers in Antioch to question the validity of their understanding of the gospel, but it further emboldened and validated the Jewish believers who still thought that the rules, rites, and rituals of the law were necessary for salvation. Peter's actions resulted in people in both groups being given mixed messages. I hope you've enjoyed this segment. We'll be back again soon with another one. And be sure to subscribe and like and ring the bell so you'll know when new ones pop up. Thanks. Have a great day.